Want to welcome to another episode of the Resource Gatherer. I'm your host, Justin. With me is my co-host, Cody. This week, we're going to be talking about a topic that we both love and cherish. It's going to be Magic the Gathering, a card game focused on different strategies. We're going to go into that in a minute. We do have a couple of announcements. So with it becoming the holiday season, we are going to be taking some breaks over this time frame. The first break we're going to be taking is over Thanksgiving. So the third week of November, we're going to go ahead and take a break there. And then after December 15th, we're going to not be making content for the rest of the weeks until after the new year. So just be prepared for that. We are going to be pushing out content in the last weeks of our releases. So the last week of the 17th would be our last day for Dungeons and Dragons content. That week, we're looking to drop our December drop for our Magic content on our YouTube channel. And the week after Thanksgiving will be our first. So the last week of November will be our first ever episode of MTG Kingdoms. Gives me a little bit of time to edit, gets us prepared, and also gives us a little bit of a break as we get to enjoy our families and other holiday festivities that we're going to get into next week. With that in mind, let's go ahead and start this episode of the Resource Gatherer. So, Cody, would you like to explain to our audience what Magic the Gathering is?
Magic the Gathering is a card game that essentially is the ultimate strategy-based game. It is derived of 6 different colors from black, blue, red, white, green, and colorless. All of them specialize in a different aspect, where some are good at card draw, some are good at removal, different aspects like that. Not one deck built will win 100% of the time, and that is one of the reasons why I love it so much. You have to build multiple different decks because some strategies are good against others. It's almost like what's that board game, Go? It's like the ultimate strategy game where it's not 100%, like one strategy cannot win 100% of the time. And that's what makes the game really fun to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the main thing too, the biggest difference between, we talked about a lot of our board game previously in the last episode. And I think one of the main differences between this and other board games is, unlike chess, which was a huge component of last week's episode, this is not a game where you walk in and everyone is set on the even playing field. If you walk in with a better strategy or stronger strategy, chances are you could beat your friends outright, or if you have stronger cards. And so that's really where, when you're playing Magic the Gathering, especially when you're playing in the formats that we play, like Commander, Rule 0 is one of the most important rules when it comes into playing these games. You need to establish what everyone's playing and what sort of strategies we're looking to play at in order to determine what type of game we want to play. For example, if you're playing, Magic has a variety of different formats. So, for example, there's 1v1 format, and 1v1 format, you should try to win every game.
Yeah.
It's a competitive system. I'm going to try to beat Cody in every single game. I'm probably going to play red. I'm probably going to try to burn him. 100%. But when it comes to like Commander, for example, which is the format we generally play, or Kingdoms, which is an offshoot of Commander focusing on hidden role cards similar to Werewolf, which is what we talked about last week. Mm-hmm. Essentially, the goal is different. The goal is fun first, or at least it should be. I know over the years, Magic sort of changed. The dynamics of Magic have changed, especially the Commander community. It's become more of a like power creep. And we've kind of talked about that off camera a few times.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, like, the price point is what's really pushed it. Like, people are playing, like, they're playing proxies on every single card that they have because the real card is worth, like, $650. We build decks for less than $300. You're going to play one card that's real, that's double the price of our deck, but there's 98 other cards in that deck,
Yeah, and I will say that what Cody's referring to is there's 2 different formats that generally use those high range of cost cards, and those cards come from Legacy and from CDH, which is competitive version of Commander, which is the version we play. So EDH, if anyone doesn't know, stands for Elder Dragon Highlander. Essentially, when Magic the Gathering was created, there was only 5 Elder Dragons that were considered legendary creatures, and the strategy was you had to choose one of these 5 legendary dragons as your commander and build a deck around it. Now, a lot of times when Commander first came out, it was just the end of the night sort of tabletop game that you play after you've been playing like Modern or Standard or whatever all night. You pull it out and you play like a 2-3 hour game with just 99 cards of bulk that you found around your house. Mm-hmm. It was like the best game to play. I've been playing Magic for, I don't know, probably about a decade now. And when I first started playing in it was like It's been almost a decade. It's been about 8 years. In 2015, when I started, Magic has grown so much in just that time frame. Like
I've been playing since like 2010.
yeah, exactly. But you also took a hiatus. I did not.
That's fair. I had a couple years where I kind of bounced around and stuff, but I remember like when the EDH decks first dropped and it was like Aloro and the Dragon and
Edric and
Chieftain, Kalidor Chieftain.
Yeah. So I think the very first one I thought was, because that was 2017, was with Edric and the Dragon set. Before that, they had Kalia, and they had all of the...
Yep. The Kalia. It was around the time they dropped that awesome Archenemy set.
Yep. So right around then, that's whenever they created... Commander created its first Commander-based... Wizards created its first Commander-based sets. And that was with some really, really powerful commanders that still see play today. I think Duretti was one of the first ones.
Yep, Duretti.
Kalia, and then there was two others.
I think Aloro was one of them.
Yeah, Aloro was one of them. But I
still play Aloro. I mean, it's so good. But.
So earlier, Cody talked about the different color pies. So essentially, because there's 6 different colors in Magic, each of them does have a theme. So for anyone who's never experienced Magic before, one of the key components is understanding what these different colors represent. So for example, red means fast, right? So the strategy for red is you're going to either use these spells that are known as burn spells, and you're going to go ahead and just light people up, right? Or you're going to play like creatures that have things like haste, an enabler that allows you to be able to attack the turn that it drops. In Magic, that's generally not considered something that can happen due to creatures having a thing called summoning sickness. When you move over into, say, green's all about growth. So the strategy for green's going to be about getting bigger, playing bigger creatures, smacking people in the face with said creatures. That's generally their strategy. If you go to white's all about life gain and about kind of like punishment. So it kind of wipes the board. It's sort of the strategies that you go with, right, for white.
The best removal.
Yeah, so generally the best removal is in white, but also because of that, the offshoot of that is that white also generally has a harder time getting lands as fast, getting cards as fast. And as Wizards has sort of progressed the game and sort of ushered in new era of these cards, the cards pies that were sort of weakest, red and white, have slowly but surely have gotten better over the years.
100%. I mean, Boros used to be the hardest set to build around.
Absolutely. And now if you look at Boros is really starting to move into an area where I think like because of red's exile effects and white's ability to not get ahead but catch up, you are able to keep up in a lot of game formatting. Going over to black strategy is pretty simple. Black strategy is kill stuff, and then eventually use those kill spells to bring your own board stay up and to
graveyard recursion.
Yeah, and graveyard stuff. And then blue is I would consider blue the trickiest color. It's also the color that is considered to be the strongest.
100%.
In forms of higher tier decks always run blue. But the thing about blue is blue does have its weaknesses like everything else. Blue's biggest advantages are card draw and removal. So they have ways to deal with problems and interact with board states that normally wouldn't be considered like favorable. For example, stopping people from casting stuff, like considering
counterspell,
right? Bouncing spells back to hands to get them out of the way. But what blue lacks is the thing that I think green is best at.
Creatures.
Blue doesn't have a way to be able to ramp nearly as fast.
Yeah.
So if you play a mono blue deck, you're basically running the problem of you're not going to ramp. You have to rely heavily on the 6th color in the color pie, which is colorless, and using artifacts in order to get around that. Red also used to be that way, but because of the strategies that red and red burn have really had and the exile effects, red doesn't need that anymore, as well as a card that really brought the new era of Magic, which was Dockside Extortionist and Treasure Mechanics.
And Jessica's Will.
And Jessica's Will. But so the Jessica's Will, I would say, goes into the line of the exile effects.
Yep.
But
it also draws or generates you free mana as well, is what the big part is.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say that anything for free is something that you should be wary of whenever you're playing games. So for our games here on the show, for MTG Kingdoms specifically, what our strategy is to take away those abilities to be able to play things for free. So in CDH, there's a lot of cards that you get to play for free. There's artifacts, for example, like Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Or Mana Crypt, sorry, Mana Volt's for 1, but Mana Crypt,
Grim Monolith.
yeah, there's a lot of like really, really high tier CDH staples that are like that. Free spells also include like Force of Will, Force a Negate, things that you can then play for free now but have to pay back on the backside or evoke a card in order to play them.
Pact Negation.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. I mean, like, and that's like definitely like what we're trying to do is just like play more of a casual format like on our show, just because it is so much, it's more fun to watch because like, don't get me wrong, like I have nothing against playing, like I have CDH decks, you know, I like playing against that high power tier, but those games typically last like 15 minutes, maybe 30 if it ends up getting like stalled out.
Yeah, it depends on the strategy. I mean, if somebody's playing stacks, you'll be there for hours, but that's because somebody decided to play stacks. But yeah. I do think that the biggest problem with Commander, and I think it's the biggest problem with what we sort of started with, because the game isn't set to be where everyone's at 0, it's not anyone's job, but it's sort of the thing that we've sort of focused on was making sure that everyone has a foot in the door where everyone can start at 0. Mm-hmm. I don't think Magic the Gathering should be based off of how much money you have. I think Magic the Gathering's win rate should be based off of how skillful you are.
Yeah. And threat assessment and everything like that.
Yeah, like the biggest thing about Magic the Gathering that I enjoy, and it's the reason why I play Commander so much, and it's why I play Kingdoms, and why we're going to be playing it here on the show, is politics. Like I said in the last episode, when it comes to games, I don't want to beat you with, you know, the game board pieces. Generally, I try to use strategies outside the game, like, you know, conversation pieces, making deals, interacting with people in a way that it's like, hey, Justin's definitely playing some sneaky stuff, but on the same token, everyone feels like they're getting something out of it. That's the way that I enjoy playing games, right? So when it comes to Magic, I don't always want to have to sit there and play a game where it's like, okay, I actually have to turn my brain on here and think about what you're playing in order to see the line in which you're winning. Don't get me wrong, like Cody, I can play that way. But when it comes to this show, the reason why we're bringing this MTG Kingdoms at a lower power level isn't because we're like, oh, we hate high power decks. It's so that way anyone who shows up on our show, regardless of how much money they have in their bank account, can show up and say, hey, I can play Magic the Gathering with a group of people and have a great time.
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what it's supposed to be. Like, you know, like I have seen people that have like full out foiled out decks that cost probably $2,000+ because they've got like the rarest of rare cards in there and stuff. I mean, it's essentially like watching Seto Kaiba on Yu-Gi-Oh come out here and like just drop billions of dollars.
Yeah, and you know what's funny is we're trying to just be the Joey Wheelers of the Yu-Gi-Oh world, right? Like we're trying to be the guy who won not because his grandpa owned a shop or his dad owned a company. It's because he was honestly the best skilled and he was a gambling man. Yeah. And he gambled that one lander and he succeeded that term with that 100%. Time wizard.
Oh, 100%, man. But that's what makes the game fun, you know, because at the end of the day, you don't have to have all the best different lands or the best mana base values and stuff like that. As long as you were having fun with it. And I started playing, I like knew the general rules and kind of learned as I went, you know, with another buddy of mine. And we would just build tribes of different things. Like, you know, he had a Mer deck, you know, back in 2011. Mers really weren't that great, but they got the job done. You know, and I had an angel deck and I had a vampire deck. And that's what we played. And it was super fun. And that's just what we did. And we could sit around for hours playing these games and go back and forth. Sometimes he wins, sometimes I win, you know. And it was just, that's the way we played it. And that's, you know, now we meet up, we play Commander, different things like that. And it's such a competitive game, but it's a fun competitive. Like, we're not doing this for money. We're not doing this for anything big. Like, we are literally just sitting here playing these games. Like, hey, I put this deck together. I think the power level is like a 6, maybe a 7. I don't know. Like, let's try it out. Oh, that's definitely a 6, man. Like, I stomped all over you because you need to fix this, or this. Like, okay.
And that becomes a thing too, right? If we start talking about like when you go to your local game stores, let's say you're a newer player and you go to a local game store you've never been to before. We've both talked about how we met at the game store, right? Mm-hmm. Generally, what I do is I ask people what their power level is of their deck. If you go on other YouTube channels and other podcasters are going to tell you similar things, right? There is no definitive a way to determine what someone's deck power level is because everyone has a different definition of what's a 6, what's a 7, what's an 8. Mm-hmm. So what I generally ask people is rather than going that approach, don't ask people 6, 7, 8 anymore because it doesn't work. Everyone thinks that they're always going to say a 7.
Yeah.
That's just generally, they're gonna be like, oh, it's a 7, but then they're playing like basically CDH staples, right? So you ask them how many infinite combos are they running? Are they running the fast mana? If they don't understand what fast mana is, you can just be like, hey, mana crypt, mana vault. And they go, oh, yeah, I'm running all that stuff. How many tutors are you running? And then what is your general line for a win? And the problem is if you meet up with people and you talk to them and they say, hey, I don't want to give you that information, chances are you shouldn't play with that person. And the reason why is because they're not looking to play a fair game. They're looking to play a game where they're constantly winning.
Yeah.
And
they're not having fun if they're not winning. And those are the people you don't really want to have in your pod.
And you always get one. Generally speaking, I'll get like 3 or 4 new people, and 3 of them will be great people. You'll be like, yeah, we're all just here to have fun. And then you have that one dude who's just like, I'm here to win. And if I don't, and this is all I have in my life, and I need to win, or otherwise I won't go home happy.
Yeah.
And you're like, cool.
Oh, I've gone like 0-7 in a night, went home and still had fun.
But see, that's the reason why I think so the reason why I built the channel. So like dating back, so Magic for me is a huge component of my life, right? So for the past almost decade, I've been playing Magic. Started playing when I was in Korea with my buddy. Him and I both bought the starter decks. He got the blue one, I got the red one. We just started smashing each other in the face. And then after that, I moved to Colorado. And then my buddy was like, hey, do you want to play Magic? I was like, oh, yeah, I've played like Magic a little bit before. And I kind of told him what I played in Yu-Gi-Oh! And so like for a lot of people, if you've never played Magic, but let's say you had exposure as a kid to Yu-Gi-Oh!, you can go, well, what deck did you play in Yu-Gi-Oh? And then you can determine what decks you'd like to play. I explained to him that the deck I like to play in Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a winged Karibo deck. And the goal of my deck, and I kid you not, I had that and I had an effects deck. The goal of my deck was to play the weakest monsters in the game and beat people to death with the weakest monsters and just be like, this is my game. This is how I want to win. I want you to not just lose. I want you to lose to a cream puff.
Yeah.
And so he's like, yeah, play goblins. And I was like, oh, okay. And it's the same strategy. It's little guys who just keep smacking you in the face with like little gnats, and you eventually just get through. And so that's really where I started with Commander, right? Well, the reason why we started the podcast is in our area, there are other programs who have other content creations here. And I observed them playing games at the game store that we were playing at. And I realized that the way that they were playing games, they had like 20 to 30 people with them. Their strategy was like, hey, we want to play this specific way. We're going to have all these people come in. They're pulling all this money in, but what they're also doing is they're pulling away from the players who are already there, right? Like we played weekly at this game store. They were getting pulled in to try to play, and they're being like promoted or whatever for that strategy. It's great for the store, great for everyone else. But the way that they're promoting games is like, hey, we need to be competitive. We need to be competitive. We need to be competitive. When you bring that to a game store every single week, eventually your locals and the people who were playing fun games are like, well, that's what I have to do to play.
Yeah, they either have to up the game or they leave and go to another store.
And that's what happens, right? Like you'll go to a game store, you'll usually find like a bunch of people who play like really either high level games or really low power games. And depending on how you approach Magic, you might have to play higher or play lower. And that's generally what I tell people to do. I generally stick with the strategy of ask my opponent what they're playing. If they say they're playing a 7, I pull out what I think is a weaker deck. I'll probably pull out what I would consider a 6. And when I say a 6, I'm saying basically an upgraded precon.
Yeah.
It's going to have a couple of additional pieces from the precon level, but it's not going to be anything broken. I'm generally not running tutors. I'm generally not running fast mana. I'm not running anything crazy, but the strategy is like, okay, it's probably like maybe an additional $50 into the precon level, right?
Yeah.
I'll play against you, determine what you're playing. If you absolutely crush me because you're playing like tutor after tutor after tutor after tutor, okay.
Adnos, Thassa's Oracle.
Yeah, you know, the CDH staples. I'll go, okay, and then I'll pull out one of my stronger tier decks, and then we'll play at a competitive level. But it shouldn't have to be where I have to determine what your power level is in the first game.
No, absolutely. I mean, like, and that's one of my favorite things. Like, I've built high-powered decks. I've built low-powered decks. Like, I'm just there to have fun. I'm there to play something that will be competitive at the table. And by competitive at the table, I mean in the aspect of, like, I'm not just going to sit there and be a punching bag.
Absolutely. And I think that...
Because that's not fun.
No, and, you know, I think the other problem, too, is a lot of people, they're like, well, I have to upgrade my decks because, you know, when someone else is able to turn one, go into a play land, go into Soul Ring, Soul Ring into like another mana rock, and then turn 2 they're like rampant growthing or like whatever they're doing, and they're ramping so hard. So by turn 4 they're pretty much set up to play and win. And you're like, I'm playing a land a turn, but I just missed my 3rd land. Like sometimes that happens and it sucks. And so I think that the biggest, like when I build decks, right, I always explain to people I think the hardest part of Magic is building your deck.
Yeah.
And so what I always strategize on when I'm building decks is there's a couple of components that you should have, and that, you know, those numbers will change, but essentially the focal points, right? So the first thing you need to have is ramp. So for those who don't know what ramp is essentially anything that's going to accelerate your mana per turn. This comes in the form of like spells like Rampant Growth or Cultivate. These are like green spells that like give you additional lands. These come in the form of like what we talked about, like Jeskai Will, like stuff that's going to like give you additional mana just for a turn. So like single output, but essentially
Seething Song.
Yeah, anything that's going to give you some sort of accelerant for that turn or for the longevity of your turn. So that way you can play something that costs more that turn in order to accelerate the game, right? So you need some ramp. The other thing you need to focus on is card draw. So the biggest problem people have in Magic, if you watch some of these other big channels, right, you'll see that the people who generally win the game are the ones who are drawing the most cards and the people who are playing the most lands. Now, to consistently win Magic, that's what you have to do. You have to be able to draw cards consistently. And so generally, whenever you're building decks, the strongest commanders are the ones that give you cards. So for example, for example, Thrasios and Tymna, right? So they are TNT as they're abbreviated in the CDH community.
Yeah, it's the most busted partner commanders they ever put together.
They're really strong, and the reason why they're so strong is Thrasio gives you scry effects, and he also potentially puts lands into your hand or on the battlefield. And then Tymna gives you early access to whenever you deal damage, you get to then use that damage to be able to draw cards. So they give you everything that you want, right? Ramp and card draw. That's what you need in order to win.
And 4 colors.
Yeah, I mean, 4 colors is pretty good too. But regardless, that's why those strategies work so well. And so when you're building your decks, you need to make sure that you have those 2 components down. Now, the other thing that people like to do, you talked about like early on, you were looking at building like a lot of type-ish decks, as they're now referred to. So, for example, if you're building merfolks, if you're building like zombies, if you're building one of these like huge archetypes and you're like, hey, I have a commander, they're this type. Like, for example, I have a rogues deck that I'm probably going to play on the show at some point. My rogues deck is I play my commander. He is a rogue. I'm going to then play more rogues. And so the strategy works, right? Because you're like, okay, well, now I have a theme. It's really easy to get behind that theme or synergy. Or, for example, some of the decks that we run are other themes. Like there's food, there's clues. There's like a billion themes now in Magic.
Voltron.
Yeah, so like you can choose one of these themes and get around the deck. So generally speaking, most people are going to focus on that. That's going to be their thing, right? You're going to have 20 to 30 cards dedicated to just that strategy. But what else are you missing? You're missing board wipes. So removal in order to deal with your opponent's threats. This isn't just creature based. You also need to be able to have things like enchantment and artifact removal, because oftentimes enchantments are the hardest things to get rid of and some of the strongest cards in Magic because of that. The other one is planeswalkers.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, planeswalkers are really annoying decks to play against because they do 2 things. 1, they destroy creatures. And 2, they sit there and they win the game. Yeah. there is no getting around that. They're basically like players, and playing them is really, really busted, which is why, in commander rulings, they're like, hey, we don't want planeswalkers as commanders. And Wizards is like, but we're going to give them to you anyways.
I mean, luckily they only have a handful of them that can be the commander. And the general rule of thumb that everyone like says at the table, see a walker, kill a walker.
Yeah, but so that's the thing too, right? So like when you've been playing Commander a long time, another huge component to playing the game and why Rule 0 is so important is if you see a commander that you've previously gone up against and you've absolutely gotten trashed like a billion times too.
Necrozar.
Yeah. See,
not going to name drop, but I'm going to name drop. Because like you get like a PTSD from that commander, like, oh, I play against that. Screw that deck. Like you know nothing about this deck because it's somebody you've never played with, but you just instantly know, like in the back of your head, you're like, I have a feeling this is what this is going to be, and it could be 100% wrong, and you're just going to bully that person, and they're going to be like, why are you doing this to me?
And it's going to be the PTSD, right? So like we have to move away from that strategy of play. We can't sit there and immediately look at the board state and go, I have to kill that person.
It's like turn 1.
Yeah, you have to turn that off, right? You have to turn that brain off, right? A part of your brain of like the PTSD. So the way you do that is through other removal options like spot removal, counterspells, ways to be able to interact with people's board states. But like we talked about with the chess game yesterday, right? Do you create an aggro strategy where you just focus on your game of winning, or do you create a board state where you're going to be constantly only holding up answers to deal with other people's threats? Let me ask you, Cody, which one do you think wins?
What? Having the board state that you set up to prevent other people from winning.
So, no. So do you think that being more defensive or being more offensive generally wins more games?
Being defensive helps out because you having a good defense will keep you up there to build your board state.
I will say it's the opposite, right? So like because I generally play games where I have a lot of answers and I deal with threats and other people aren't doing that, because oftentimes that'll happen in a lot of your game stores, I lose. I'll get second place pretty much consistently. And the reason why is because I'm the only one dealing with threats. So like your dad said, right? Sometimes you don't have to worry about what other people are doing. You just have to focus on pushing your pieces out.
No, 100%. But I look at it as like having the board state is defensive.
So protecting your board state, yes. But I'm saying, so for example, what I was referring to is removing other people's boards.
Okay. Yeah.
So is keeping your board state alive more important or dealing with an opponent's strategy better?
I mean, that's when you come into the threat assessment. Is it worth the sacrifice? Is it worth the damnation to blow the board up, to take care of their problem while nixing your own? Maybe. It really just depends on the situation. And that's coming back to earlier. What I said is like this game is 100% like...
There's no exact answer.
There is no perfect answer. There is no perfect deck. It is half of it's luck, drawing the right cards, especially in Commander. There's your one commander and then 99 cards that you draw through.
Versus in the traditional formats of Modern, Standard, and etc.
Where there's 40.
There's 60 cards, and there's 4 copies of each of the cards except for basic lands where you can have any number of that you want. The same thing's for Commander, though. You can have as many basic lands as you want. But you can only have one of each, which is why Commander is such a like high-risk, high-reward gambling game, right? The goal of Commander, if you are truly the king of games in Commander, you're Joey Wheeler. You are 100% the Joey Wheeler. You got luck on your side, and for whatever reason, you were able to beat these higher-tier decks because you decided that your pet card eventually was going to be the thing that got you there.
Oh, no, 100%.
But going back to the strategy of like what decks need, right? So we talked about ramp, we talked about removal, we talked about card draw, win cons. So the last thing that you need, right? And this goes back to the strategy of do you progress your board state or do you stop other people? Can you win?
Yeah.
And this is the thing that I generally think new people in Magic forget to build into their decks. They think my cool synergy of I have a bunch of creatures. My goal is to just punch people in the face with my creatures, and eventually I'll get there. Now, that's a cool strategy. Don't get me wrong. I am 100% on that strategy. Some of my favorite decks literally are punch you in the face as hard as I can. I eventually hope to get there.
Yeah.
However, this is where the tier differentiators become, right? If you're winning through combat, generally speaking, unless you're playing Najeela,
or my Tongarth.
or you're playing like infinite combats, right? Your strategy is generally going to be a lower tier.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at strategies that are like not focusing on interacting with other people, you don't have to deal with, I don't have to deal combat damage to you to win. Mm-hmm. That strategy is generally considered stronger than a combat-based deck.
No, 100%.
And the reason why is because
you have cards that literally say you win the game.
That too. But the other reason is because there's a lot of cards in Commander, like you said, like that allow you to sit here and just basically border your walls and just hold out. So, for example, the reason Commander damage was invented was because of life gain strategies.
Oh, yeah.
So if you have a deck that's playing life gain and you're playing Soul Sisters, right? Soul Sisters, like one of them, basically anytime a creature enters the battlefield, you gain a life. Now, that's every player. Mm-hmm. So in regular Commander, that's 3 other players.
Including yourself, though. That's 4.
That's 4. And in Kingdoms, it's 4 other players.
5, 6, 7. Yeah, depends how big the pot is.
Exactly. So then you start playing into that strategy. So then, like, the reason why life gain strategy is so strong and I'm not saying this to deter against other play styles. I'm just saying that, like, generally speaking, in early Commander games, when it was invented as like as a synergistic way of playing, without Commander damage, everyone would be all the top tier decks would be running life game decks.
Oh, 100%.
It would be, I want to get to 1 million life as quickly as possible, and then I just have to get you to 0. And then it's like, that's the whole strategy. So then you have things like Aether Flux. You have other strategies of like just blasting people, right?
Yeah.
And if there was no such a thing as commander damage, you never would win a game.
No, it'd be impossible.
But when it comes to strategies, for example, like Voltron decks, which Cody brought up before, which the whole strategy is just alpha strike, basically somebody one at a time.
With your commander.
The problem becomes, how do you protect your commander when it dies? Because it's going to die.
Well, I mean, I put all kinds of good stuff on my, I don't know. I make mine indestructible. I make mine unable to be targeted by spells. I give it protection from colors. I give it
but the
unblockable.
But again, the reason why that deck wouldn't necessarily be as strong as, say, like a Wheels deck, right? Mm-hmm. Is because your strategy still focuses on the concepts of, I have to attack.
Yeah.
Attacking is one of the lower power strategies for Magic. So, if we're looking at tiers, ask the people how they win the game. If they say that they win the game through
Ad Naz and Thassa's Oracle, or
Exquisite Blood and Sanguine Bond, because we just talked about life gain, or they're talking about like, if they're playing Wheels, it's like they're playing, let's say they're playing like Perforos, and they're playing Locust God.
Yeah. Like
it's a simple strategy. Locust God
3-card combo.
Yeah, or Niv Mizzet, or any of the other like high tier is it strategies too. Like there's a lot of strategies that just say, hey, I win the game because on this turn I did this thing. Now, for creatures, generally how it works is they just play the big creature card, which is, they play Craterhoof.
Yeah.
So you just play Craterhoof and then boom, I win. But it's like, again, if you're asking people this way of playing and you're getting back to your rule 0, and the problem that you're running into is you're constantly losing games, and you're like, well, I should tier up my decks. Maybe you find a different group.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest part, right? Is you have to find the right group of people. And it's not just about, it's like anything else. It's like having a D&D group.
Yeah.
You might be sitting there and you might have a different way of playing than other people, and you have to look for that group and find that group of people who are looking to do the same thing that you're doing. And I think that's what we're going to do here at MTG Kingdoms when we create our content. It's really just try to create a very fun, flavorful style of play where hidden roles become really important. And I think that's really what's going to be really fun about our strategy versus traditional Commander, is that Kingdoms really focuses on that ideology of like, hey, I have to be fun and interesting and do different things. The other thing is we added some unique rules for our Kingdom strategy. Cody, do you want to go over our unique rules? Do you remember them?
I mean, some of them. So, I hope I followed them all. No, for our Kingdoms, we're not going to play Infect just because of Infect is a very powerful mechanic in the aspect of you get 10 Infect points, you lose.
And this isn't a hard rule. It's just something we're straying away from. We're asking players to actively move away from for this specific game.
Just to come up with something a little different, something that's more fun to watch, essentially.
The other thing that we added to ours is no free spells. So this to include a really, really powerful format in the game called Cascade. Cascade is a game where you get to basically play
Cascade so much.
So everyone hates Cascade. Even people who play Cascade hate Cascade because they have to then go through their whole deck 8 or 9 times and shuffle 8 or 9 times in order to get 2 cards.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Okay. So anyways, we're moving. It just takes so much time, energy, moving away from those strategies. Also the 0-drop artifacts, stuff like that. So anything that you can cast for free. The other rule that we really focused on is we created additional rules for each of the hidden roles. So if you don't know, Kingdoms has 5 roles. There's the king. Unlike the rest of the players, their life total is at 50. The goal for the king is to kill everyone else. That is their goal. They win when they're the last man standing. Now, they have an ally, a hidden rolled ally known as the knight. The knight's role is to kill everyone else except for the king and the knight, and then they can reveal their card, and then we go, hey, we won. The next role is called the usurper. The usurper's role is essentially they're going to kill the king. When they kill the king goes to 1 life. They go to 50 and they become the king. So then it's the same strategy as the king, just now they are the king. Then we have the bandit. The bandit's role is just kill the king. If they kill the king, they win. And the last one's usually called the assassin. This is where we mixed it up.
And this is no one likes to be the assassin.
The assassin's general rule was their goal was they had to kill everyone in order to win.
The king had to be last.
The king had to be last, right? You had to kill everyone first, because if the bandit was still alive, then yeah, they would win. How we're doing it is we're calling it the Joker. And the Joker's role is when they kill someone, they take their role card. And the reason we did that was in order to create a new environment where it's like, hey, there's 4 other people who have role cards. We kill them. We take their role card. Now it becomes a more interesting game. The other thing that's interesting is each of the role cards have a additional effect that they can do now for the face down role cards. So they're not just always having to play the same strategy. If I'm the bandit, I don't always have to just kill the king. If I kill another player through combat, and that's why, again, we're focusing more on combat-focused decks, that lower tier game. If I kill them through well, no, it's just through damage. We just did it through damage. So
yeah.
But if I kill another player, I can reveal my card. If I'm the bandit, they become the bandit, I become the bandit king. Their life total becomes 10, and they are now my ally. And now it's 2 against 2 against 1. Then the same strategy for the usurper. The usurper kills somebody other than the king. They reveal their card. They can then have them be the usurper king, the usurper knight. So the cool strategy is if you're the usurper, you can kill somebody, make them your usurper knight. However, if you kill them, make them your knight, and then you kill the king and you become the king, the usurper knight still stays with the usurper. Mm-hmm. So then it's going to be 2-on-1 versus 2-on-1. So it makes it fair. And then lastly, if you're the knight, if you kill somebody, you get to reveal your role card after they're dead. So that's generally the strategy of how we made it fair. It's more balanced, it's more interesting, and it creates a lot more flavor and context of what we're looking to do with Magic.
And it forces people to play their role more.
Exactly.
Because that's like one of the biggest problems like we ran into playing like just casual games of Kingdoms with our friends is everyone would just pretend to be the knight and try to progress board states, and then they just try to win all out at once. And that kind of gets boring.
The other thing, too, is it de-incentivizes the idea of that I want to just do a bunch of damage to everyone at the same time. For example, those Niv Mizzet decks, those decks that are like, hey, I have to synergize it. I kill everyone at the same time, like aristocrats, et cetera, et cetera. Decks that don't focus on combat. It puts you in a bind where it's like, okay, unless I can target how much damage I can do at each person. So Niv Mizzet and I think aristocrat. No, because Niv Mizzet you can choose. It's
Niv Mizzet you can choose. Necrozar just does equal damage to everyone, which is effective, but it also is boring.
So then you could do Blood Artist, but you don't do Zulaport.
Yep.
Because Blood Artist is choose versus Zulaport's all. So anything that has to do with all players, which is generally what you would use in in most Commander games, you would stay away from, and you could choose other strategies. So you have to be a little bit more creative with those high tier, combo style decks of synergizing your pieces. But realistically, the strategy was we wanted to create something that when you sit down at a table, it isn't just I sit here, I turtle up, and I just wait till I win. Mm-hmm. And everyone just sort of just play land, I win. We wanted to create something that's going to be fun, interesting, and engaging to watch. Also, the fact that you might not know who people's roles are.
Yeah.
So the huge component that I think that I enjoy about role-playing games is we get to play Guess Who. Mm-hmm. So as you're progressing through the game, you're going to be able to play along with us of who's what hidden role, and then either being right or completely wrong.
Yep.
And, like one of my favorite shows is like The Masked Singer. And that's the same strategy where it's like.
You would.
I listen. It's a cool show because it has the same. You have to guess who people are. And sometimes I've been really, really on it. I got Daughtry. I was like, that sounds like Daughtry. And my mom was like, no, it's not. And I was like, and then she's like, oh, wow. I was like, see, I told you.
I couldn't pick out Daughtry in a lineup.
Listen, that's fair. But he has a very distinct tone, all right?
That's a dude?
Yeah. It's a band, but the dude who sang it, he was on like American Idol like years ago.
Sure.
Yeah, listen,
I live in a hole, man. Like,
yeah, that's fair. But regardless, I think Kingdoms in general is going to be a really great game, and we hope that you guys watch along with us on our YouTube channel. Remember, it's a resource gatherer, and then this is going to be MTG Kingdoms. So we'll see you guys next time on the Resource Gatherer, and we'll talk to you guys again.